Hello everyone, my name is Berta Mora, and today I'm going to show you guys how to track your shot in Cinema 4D and bring it into Notch so you can composite graphics just like this. So let's get started. So here we are in Cinema 4D, and what we're going to do is we're going to first track our shot. So in order to track a shot, we're going to go to the motion tracker. There's two options to do this. Usually the full solve works, and that's pretty automatic. So what you'll do is just click the full solve and find your footage and then enter it here and then open it up, and then it'll start doing the full solve. But in most cases, this doesn't work. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do it manually to show you guys the process of how to do that within the motion tracker. So let's select the motion tracker. So once we selected the motion tracker, you get this window here, and the first thing we'll do here is import our footage. It's important to bring in your footage as an image sequence. So what we'll do is we'll select our first image from the sequence and import that. Once that comes in, you'll be able to see it as the background. One important note is to make sure that your actual project settings is the same FPS as your footage. So in my case, mine is 30 FPS. So make sure that yours is set to 30, 24, 60, or whatever you're using for your track. But anyways, back to the motion tracker. So within the motion tracker, you have a couple options. The ones that we're worried about here is the resampling. So you want to bring that up to 100%. So this makes your footage 100% quality, and then from there you get a better tracking quality from the tracker. So the next thing we'll do is we'll go in here. What I'm going to do here is this is the default pattern size. So this is the pattern size that it's going to track within. So I'm going to make this a little bigger, maybe 35, and I'll make this 75. I've experimented with a couple of these already, so I found that these are good. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to actually add about 1,500 tracking points. And you can go ahead and just create your tracking points, and you'll be able to create your tracking points here. As you can see, I have some areas missing. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to increase this value here, and they'll spread my trackers out a little more. So I'm going to delete and create the trackers. So now you see my trackers are a little bit more spread out here. So the next thing we're going to do actually is I'm going to go ahead and delete those. And it's important to find a good area within your scene to start the tracker. So if you notice here, within the scene, you start noticing the motion, and you still see the white car and those cars within the scene. But at some point, the camera looks the other way, and a lot of those features are lost. So I've tested it a couple times, and I've realized that if I start in the beginning or here, depending on your footage or how it is, you'll get different results. So for me, because at the end I have this kind of just this pan that we barely see throughout the footage, what I'm going to do actually is I'm going to go ahead and set my points here. That way my auto points start from this kind of camera shot that happens that pans right and then left. And then this way I'll get a better tracking. It's kind of hard to explain, but I would recommend you watching some tutorials so that you can kind of understand this process a little better. So for me, I found out that this is probably the best area, so I'm going to create the auto points here. And the next thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and hit auto track. So when I hit auto track, it's going to track from that point forward, and then it's going to go back to that frame where I started it, and then go backwards and track through there. And I'll kind of show you guys once that's finished processing. Okay, now that we're finished tracking here, you can see now that we have all of our trackers within the scene. So if I scrub forward, you can see those trackers move. And if I also scrub backwards, you can kind of see all those trackers stay in place, and we won't lose any of them. So this will be a lot of trial and error depending on your footage. So just make sure, like I said, maybe watch some tutorials and learn more about this process. But the next thing we're going to do is we're actually going to threshold the error. So what we've done right now is we just solved a 2D track. So it's checked all the pixels in 2D space. And the next process here is to kind of create a 3D environment or a 3D space of all this data. So in order to do that, what we're going to do is we're going to threshold some of those errors out. That way we get a better final result once we do the 3D solve. So I'm going to turn this on. This is going to turn on, and what we're going to do is we're going to go to motion tracker. And inside the motion tracker, you have a motion graph. And what you see here is this is all the little trackers that are within the scene, and you can see how well your shot is being tracked with this graph. So the green ones are good tracks, the red ones are bad tracks. I'm actually going to go ahead and go to this view here. So now this view actually allows you to see all your tracks on a graph. So the next thing that I'll do here is show you how this works. So just to show you, if we didn't have any error threshold in here, you can see kind of this graph go a little crazy. And what you want is all these top ones are bad tracks. So what we want to do is kind of crush those tracking points. That way you have more of a linear graph, so that the end result of the 3D solver has a better quality track. So you can zoom in here with your mouse wheel and you can kind of see how we still have bad tracks. I'm going to go maybe around 12. That kind of looks good for me. And I'm just going to stick with that, and we can close this. So now what we've done, we've actually moved this error threshold to 10 to 12%. And that just means that we've removed a lot of those error trackers within our scene that will, if we keep, it will make our tracking quality a lot more poor. So from here, what we're going to do next is go to the 3D solver, and within the 3D solver, you can enter this information. I usually just like to go automatic, but if you know all this information from your camera, sensor, or whatever type of footage you have, you can go ahead and enter that. The next thing that I'll do is I'll run this 3D solver, and this is actually going to go through the process of solving that 2D track into a 3D scene that you can work with to composite 3D graphics onto. So I'm going to let this solve for a while, and what I'll do is I'll come back once it's done and go through the next process with you guys. So now that our 3D solver is done solving, what we want to do is we want to select the motion tracker. We want to expand it and select auto features. And within here, you can see all of our features being tracked within the scene. And this is a good sign when you see everything sticking. So the next thing we want to do is we want to actually create a floor plane. And what we'll do here is we'll select our motion tracker, right click, and select motion tracking tags. Within the motion tracking tags, you want to select planar. And what planar is going to do is going to allow us to create a floor plane, and then we can set the orientation of that floor. So be patient with this process. It's a little slow. It's got to think a lot. So what I'm going to do is with these features selected, I'm going to look at some shot perspective here that I can kind of create a plane where the car is going to be parked. So if I select the tag, I can select this arrow here. But before, we'll set our axes to Y. That way our orientation is set the right way for this plane. But this all depends on how you want to set your floor plane, or whatever you're tracking. You can set that orientation here. So the next thing we want to do is select this arrow. And now you'll see this pink triangle pop up. And it takes 3 points to create a plane. So what we'll do is we'll select some points within our scene that will represent the floor. That way we can create that floor plane. And be patient with this process. It's a little slow. So don't go ahead and start clicking, otherwise the system might crash on you. So select the second point here, and you'll see it snap into place once it's ready. Give it a sec. All right, there we go. So now the next thing is I gotta find a point within this direction. Select this one. And now you saw, once I added a third plane, everything kind of lined up. So now what I can do is I can create a plane here, and it will create this plane, but it doesn't look like it's facing the right orientation, and we'll go ahead and fix that. So now that we have that, we can scrub through it and make sure everything is good. So what I'm going to do next is I'm actually going to select my plane here. Taking a moment. There we go. And I'm going to zero this out. And I'm going to zero this out, zero that out, and zero that out. So once I zero that out, it won't be in the frame. So the next thing we'll have to do is we want to add a motion tracker tag position. And what position is think of position kind of like your origin. So what we'll do is once it adds that tag, we'll be able to select it, and you have this window here in your position constraint, and you can select the arrow and pick your origin. So based on your scene, like I said, you'll have to kind of pick that the origin point, and you'll have to play with that a little bit. So I'm going to go back here, and now you can see that my plane is where my origin is. So if I scrub through that, you know, that's kind of where I want the car. So the next thing we want to do here is we want to adjust the floor plane to the size of the car. That way, when we're compositing, we know that the scale is right. So if we go to Google, I've actually searched these dimensions already. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take 187 length here in inches and convert those to centimeters. The reason I'm converting them to centimeters is because my Cinema 4D is currently set to centimeters. So in the Z space or Z direction, what I want to do is I want to actually give it the height. And as you can see that the plane is now the right length. And what I want to do is also find the width of the car. So that's 76 inches, and I'll convert that to centimeters and copy that and paste that on the width. So now we know that the car is going to be this big. So what you can do is you can select your plane, and I'm not sure why, but I have to select this and go to coordinates and actually adjust my actual X to adjust it. So I would say the car would be there, and you can kind of scroll or scrub a little bit. The car wouldn't be all the way towards that car there, so you want to push it back in Z space. So maybe that's a good spot, and you can see that's kind of working. So this is great, but as you can see, the plane is very, very big. Our car would not be that long. So in order to fix this, we actually have to give our scene scale. In order to give our scene scale, we have to select the motion tracker tag, right click, and go to the motion tracker tags again, and select vector. So vector is going to allow us to select 2 points within our scene to give it scale. And for me, I did not measure anything in my scene, so I don't know any of the dimensions of this scene. But what I do know is that this is a cross trek here, and I can go to the internet and see how long that Subaru cross trek is. So that Subaru cross trek is 176 inches in length. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to convert those inches to centimeters. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to select Y, because that's the orientate, or actually I'm not going to do anything with this, because you guys can you guys can enter this data based on your scene and what you're measuring. But all I know is that I do know the length of something within my scene, and that is going to be the Subaru Crosstrek. So once I select known, this will pop up. You'll be able to click it. It's a little slow, as I said. Now I'm going to enter that, and now these 2 points, if you see this pink line, will become the scale of my scene. So if I go to the auto features and click vector constraint, what we can do now is we can select the first point and find a point that's close to the car. So I'm going to select that point. And once that gets selected, I'll be able to select the other point. And once that is done, it will actually scale my scene properly. So give it a moment. And now you can see that my actual plane of the Lexus car got a little smaller. And what I can do is I can actually bring him up a little bit more. So I can go, and then now you can see that the dimensions of this plane would resemble a car size, and that's exactly what we want. So we can scrub. I'm pretty happy with the way that this is tracking. So we're pretty close to importing this into Notch. So the next thing that we'll do here is we're going to actually select our solved camera, go to the beginning of the frame, and if we go to layout, we can select animate. Once we select animate, we'll get this new window down here, expand the motion tracker, select your solved camera, and we can go to functions, bake objects. Select bake objects, and we have this include all parameters. Check that, press OK, and let it process. So this is going to process all those keyframes and actually bake them to a camera. That way we can import that camera into Cinema 4D and we'll be able to get the same tracking data. Okay, so now that's done baking, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to startup. And what I do usually is I will go ahead and save this. Once that's saved, you can save an incremental, and now you have a new version that you can edit for Notch. So for Notch, all we need is this camera and this plane. So we can go ahead and delete this, and now all the data that we've processed will stick to this camera and this plane. So if we jump into that camera, we now see that if we scrub through this, we have all that tracked data as if it was tracked and there was footage behind it. So that looks about right. So I'm going to go ahead and save this. And the next thing we'll do is we'll save this file and import it into Notch. And I can show you guys how to composite graphics once we're in Notch. So now that we're here in Notch, first thing we'll do is import our assets. So I'm going to import my footage. I'm going to go ahead and import my 3D assets. Cinema 4D files. So here's this Lexus. So one of the things that's important here is make sure that you match your scale within your 3D software, in my case, Cinema 4D. So since my Cinema 4D is set to centimeters, this one, my scenes will be imported as 0.01. That way they match in scale. So we'll let that load. Next thing we'll do is we'll import our tracked scene. It's also a Cinema 4D file. And also the scale is set to 0.01. And we'll also import an HDRI image and a LUT. And I think that's all we need for our tutorial here. So let's start by setting our background. So I'm going to bring in my footage. I'm going to add it to screen space with an image 2D. Connect that to the root. So now that we've added our footage here, if you see here, we have a frame rate. I'm going to set mine to 30 because my video is actually at 30 FPS. I'm also going to set my frame rate of my project here at 30 FPS. So enter 30. And one more thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and change the length of my footage. That way everything matches. I'm going to name it background and set it to 22 seconds. I'm going to scroll out, select the root layer and scale children to parent length. That way it sizes it up to the right time length. So now that we have our background, I'm going to go ahead and add another layer. This is going to be our car comp. And our car comp is a little long, so we'll go ahead and trim it down. So now that we have our car comp, I'm going to set this to alpha. And if you see, nothing happens. The reason why, even if I uncheck, I can't uncheck solo. So the reason why here is because you have to go to project, settings, and go to the general section of the settings. And if you see this option here, layer as separate effects, if you uncheck that, that allows you to use the layers as one full composition. So you can stack them like After Effects. In our case, the bottom layer here, our car comp, is on top and our BG layer is on bottom. So now we can go ahead and unsolo it. And what we can see here is if we select our car comp, we have a blend with alpha, which we added. So if we set that to blend, that will not allow you to have alpha and it will become black. So if you set that blend with alpha, you'll be able to see these layers composited on top of each other, which is what we need to composite our graphics. So I'm going to select car comp and go into our node graph. So now that we're in our node graph, what we'll do here is we'll import our tracked shot that we tracked in Cinema 4D. I'm going to go ahead and connect that to the root and expand it. That way you can see the contents of the actual imported 3D scene. So what we have here is a plane, and we also have the solved camera that we solved in Cinema 4D from our track shot. So what we'll do here is, I'm just going to double check my settings before I go forward. Okay, we're good. So the next thing we'll do here is we're actually going to add a camera. That way, once we add the camera, we actually have the solved camera data within a Notch camera. If you press 6, you'll be able to go within that camera, and as you can see the ground plane of Notch, we now see that our camera is tracking within the scene, so that's a good thing. The next thing we'll do is we'll add a plane. I'm going to add a shape 3D. That way we can have a plane and match it up to what we did in Cinema 4D for scale. That way we actually have the right dimensions for our floor and for our car to make sure that everything is properly scaled. So I'll set this to a plane. And if you remember, I had some dimensions of the car. So I'll bring these here, and I already did the conversions. So I'll take the length and I'm going to copy it in size Y. And I'm also going to take the width and copy that. So now that we have that, as you can see, our plane is actually really, really large. The reason why is because the way Notch units work is they actually scale in all directions. So if you have a cube and you want it to be 1 meter, you have to change it to 0.5, because what happens, everything grows from the origin out. So it will grow 1 meter in all directions. So if it's 111, it's actually 2 meters. So what you want is you want to set it to actual 0.5 if you want an actual Notch meter. So here I'm just going to go ahead and divide by 2 because everything is scaled times 2 because it grows in both directions. And now if you can see our comp, it looks like what we had in Cinema 4D. So that looks pretty good. So now that we have that going, we'll be able to bring in our car and start doing the compositing. So a couple more things before we import our car here. If we select our Cinema 4D scene, we want to select lock to frame rate. That way it locks to the frame rate that we actually baked our camera to, and also based on your footage. In my case, it's 30. Another thing I'm going to do is I'm going to set the field of view Y. I found out that setting the field of view Y compared to my Cinema 4D file looked better, but this may be different for you. So if we go to Cinema 4D, select your camera, we can see field of view vertical, and that's 34.619. So I'm going to enter that here. So 34.619. Whoops. And I'm also going to rename my shape 3D to floor. So that's kind of it to prepare my scene so that I can now bring in my car. So if we go back to resources, we can select the vehicle that we're going to use to composite. I'm going to go ahead and add him to my floor. That way my floor becomes the actual pivot point and position of my car. So as you can see here now, my car is in the scene. And if we go to the beginning of the scene and play this, we can now see that our car is being tracked within the scene. So with this, we can go ahead and now start, lighting it, texturing it, and kind of make it look like it's part of the scene. So let's do that next. So what we're going to do next is we're going to add our environment map, connect that to the root. I'm also going to add a video loader. This will be for my HDRI. I'm using a video loader, that way I can actually add effects here to start manipulating my HDRI. So if I need to change the color or if I need to blur it, I can do it within this video loader. If I add it to my environment map, I get less control of that image going into my environment map. So I much rather do it here. So if we look in here, we can select our beach house. This will be in your video loader. So if you select view and viewport, you can kind of see that HDRI. Once we have that going, what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a few materials to my to my model. If you can see here, it's a little slow when you move Cinema 4D files around. So one thing that I usually do, I usually right click my imported scene, click this imported 3D scene options and create nodes from scene. What this will do is it'll take all my 3D models within my actual imported scene and then add them to individual notch nodes here, or I should say 3D objects. So I'm gonna now that I have this, now that I've converted these, I'm gonna connect them to my floor and deselect them. You don't want to connect all of them. So you just want to connect the Lexus root root node here. So now that we have that, everything is black. I'm going to go ahead and go into my root node and enable deferred rendering, high dynamic range, and anti-aliasing. I can now create some materials, and I'll need a few materials here. So I'm just going to go ahead and copy them. I'll just copy all of these. And the next thing that I'll do is I will go ahead and add these materials to my model. So the first material is chrome, so I'm going to label this chrome. Next material, that is clear glass. That's black. Mirror. Window glass. So I mean, at this point, really, you've seen how we've imported the Cinema 4D scene. So if you guys want to go ahead and pause here for your scene and start with that, you can. If not, you can keep following what I'm doing here, and you can kind of just see a little bit more things that I do to make this scene be part of my actual footage. So this is glass, orange glass. So it might be a little slow for some of you, but if you want to keep watching, you can. So now that we have that, we've actually added all of our materials. And the first thing that I'll do here is I'm going to go ahead and enable my car paint. What you want to do, actually select all your materials, and we'll do environment mapping. And now you can see, as soon as I enabled environment mapping, you can kind of see what happened within my scene. So now you can see that I'm being I'm reflecting HDRI onto my car, and you can start seeing a little bit of that definition. So the first thing I'll do here is I will go into my metallicness, change that to metallicness. I'm going to go to my black, and the black is the top area of the car and some side panels. So from here, I'll also enable that. And right now it's chrome. So we'll change our specular color to kind of a grayish, and also this really doesn't have an effect. So maybe we'll just make this a little bit blacker and give it some roughness, not too much. The next thing we'll do is we'll go into our car and give it some also metallicness. And now you can see that we have a chrome car in here, but I'm going to make my car red. So if I bring all this down, bring up my red here, and also bring the red a little down, that way it's not too strong. And from here, we'll adjust our HDRI to give it a little bit more diffuse. And if you really want to, you can also go ahead and adjust your HDRI. If I go to my scene here and go to the beginning of the frame, I see my glass here. I also see some trees. So I know that in my HDRI, I have some trees within the scene. So I'm actually going to rotate until I actually see those trees hit that windshield of the car. I think that's it right there. Another thing you can do is in your environment map, you can select the resolution. This is the resolution for the HDRI. The only thing with this is that this does bring performance down, so be careful with that. I will also add a light, and with this light, I'll be able to kind of cast a shadow onto the car, onto the floor, and this will enable us to kind of start compositing our graphic within the scene to match it with what's happening. One thing that I'll do here real quick actually is rotate my heading a little bit of my floor. That way my car's not parked completely straight. So maybe something like that. Just adjust it a little bit. Skip towards the middle of the frame. And from here, what I'm going to do is I usually go to scattered lighting so that I can actually see my light. So I'm going to step out of here. By pressing 5, you can go into your orbit camera. I'm going to bring my light up. I've also parented my light here to my car, or parented my car, targeted my car to that light, or the other way around, targeted the light to the car. So now that you see here, we can go ahead and enable cast shadows, and you'll see a really big shadow. So now that our shadow is being cast, it's also being cropped here. Let's go into camera 6, and you can see now that that shadow is being cropped by our plane. So I'm going to go ahead and bring that plane up a little bit just to capture that shadow here. And I'm also going to make it larger in the Y. So now, as you can see, if we scroll through the scene, our shadow is actually within the plane. So once we have this going, I'm going to soften my shadows a little bit. That way they're not too strong. Maybe even bring it up to 3. That doesn't look so good. Another thing that you can do is you can bring your shadow up a little bit more. Let's see what 20 looks like. That looks a little better. I'm also going to push my light backwards. That way it's kind of more under the car, and I'm going to maybe move it to the left a bit. If you adjust the angle here, you can soften the shadow a little bit. So depending on your scene, you can soften this shadow so that you can match it up with your floor or the shadows that are within the scene. The next thing that we'll do is add a shadow catcher. So the shadow catcher is amazing because this allows you to use a material as a shadow. So if I apply it to my floor, and this will only work if you actually have deferred rendering on, otherwise you won't get a shadow. So if I turn it off there, it just becomes black. So now that I've enabled shadow catcher, you can see that my shadow isn't strong anymore. So from here, what I'm going to do is now I can bring it down and start kind of matching that shadow. Remember, you also have scattering on, so I'm going to turn that off to bring my footage back to its original contrast. And I'm going to go ahead and bring it down. No, bring it up a little more to spread it open. And from here, adjust the light cone. Maybe you want it a little stronger or softer. That's how you kind of affect that. So that's a shadow. If you can see, right now it's a little slow. So I'm going to go into our environment map, and I'm going to bring down my environment mapping because that actually brings the performance way down. So be careful with that. So if you can see here, we have a car within our scene tracked. We have a shadow. If we go here, our shadow's back. That doesn't look right. If we close this, or if we disable this, you can kind of see this shadow. It's actually under the car. So what we'll do is go back to our light and bring it forward in Z space, and also a little bit under the car, like that. So, you know, this is really just figuring out your scene and kind of adjusting everything within your scene based on how it looks. So now, you know, from this perspective, it looks off. So I'm just going to go ahead and do that. And my shadow seems a little too strong compared to this. And also I'm going to soften it up a little bit. So
just keep playing with those parameters and make it look as good as you guys want within your scene. I'm actually going to brighten my car up a little bit. It's a little too dark. The way I'm going to do this is by adjusting the car paint again. So if we go into the car paint, bring this up, I can bring emissiveness up a little bit, but that will not look right. So we'll have to change this to black, or I should say red. Once it's red, you can now see a little bit better color material on the car. It's still a little dark, so I'm going to go ahead and play with these options. Let me maybe give it an ambient light, and this will just brighten everything up a little bit more. Not that much, so you'll have to bring it down a little bit. And it's kind of looking a little too fake now, so I'm going to go ahead and bring down my reflectiveness. The reflectiveness does make it too fake, so bring that, and also bring down your specular. So once you bring your specular down, it'll look a little better. I'm going to go ahead and add some film grain here, so that way we can add a little bit of noise into our scene. So if you select alpha here, I'll also apply it to the alpha within your scene. So I'm going to bring these down, also the blur scale, and just give me some alpha, or give me some noise. So you can start seeing, based on how much noise is within your scene, you can kind of play with that. And you can see how maybe adding a little bit of blur along with some blur scale, that can kind of, bring your car into your scene a little better. So it's a little too metallic still, so I'm going to go ahead here and start, removing some of that metallicness, maybe even making it a little blacker. And from there, once we adjust that, let's maybe adjust some of the other parameters. I'm going to go ahead and adjust the glass window. And with that, it's just bring up metallicness all the way up, maybe remove or add a little bit of roughness. That way you can kind of see. Also maybe emissiveness doesn't work, and I'll make it a little bluish green. Usually glass, as you can see here, it's a little bluish green. So now we're getting a nice reflection there of our scene. I'm going to go to the beginning of my scene and maybe adjust my environment map a little bit more. There we go. So now we're getting some of that tree reflection within the mirror. One more thing that I'll do here is I'm going to go ahead and adjust the glass. So the clear glass is the actual the headlights of this car. So bring that all the way up. But with that, what we'll want to do is we will want to make that actually alpha blended. That way you can kind of see through it. So if you bring down your alpha blend here, you can start seeing your glass a little better. Not a lot, but just add a little bit. That way you can kind of see some clear and reflectness through that. So now that we have our glass, we can step out and maybe make this a little brighter. It's not that bright. Actually, that's not working. Let me do 1.2 and reduce that a little bit more. Wash that out. So our shadow's looking a little bit better. The car is still a little dark, so I'll keep playing with that parameter. So at this point, you guys can go ahead and start, you can start your project. You don't really need to keep watching this tutorial. I've already covered the most important parts within the tutorial, and that is tracking your scene in Cinema 4D, and also tracking and exporting that so that you can track your shot within Notch. So you'll get a result like this. One more thing that I'll show you guys is if we actually go to our timeline, we can create another comp, and this will be an effects comp. So if you select effects and you go to composite, select the composition, and what will happen with this is that now you can actually apply effects on all your layers at once. So if I add a LUT here, with this LUT, I'm able to affect both the car comp and the background comp. So let's go ahead and do that. And now you can see that that's happening to both layers. So as you do this, you can start adding some final color correction for your scene. Maybe I'll add a little bit of contrast to kind of tighten that in with a little bit of color correction. And also some color grading, which I've added already. So add the color correction. And from here, you can make these maybe the blackers a little blacker, make that more contrasty. And maybe, you know, just adjust whatever you guys need to so that it looks a little more believable for your scene. I can give it like a global tint based on what that, based on the effect that you're looking for. You can add a global tint to, you know, match the scenes a little better. So we can keep going on here with our scene and start compositing it and making it better and better. But I'm going to go ahead and stop here. That way you guys can start your projects. If you have any questions or if I missed anything, let me know. I will try to answer those questions. And yeah, so here's a final result. It's not perfect in the tutorial, but you can make it as perfect as you want. I've just provided you guys some steps so that you guys can start doing these kind of effects within your track shots for Cinema 4D. Thank you guys.